The morning after my husband's funeral, my daughter slid glossy retirement home brochures across my kitchen table and called my house too much for you now. Days after bragging online she'd secured Dad's $55 million. I felt the air leave my chest, but I kept my voice even. 65 years teach you how to stand up without raising your voice. Instead of pleading, I started gathering proof banknotes, messages, and the small brass key my husband told me never to lose. The victory she paraded was only the opening act. 5 days later, she was the one at my door begging for reasons she never saw coming. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The day of Rufus's funeral should have been about him, about the decades we spent side by side, about the family we built. Instead, I felt like a guest at my own life. I stood near the front pew, clutching a tissue, listening to the organ's heavy chords echo through the Houston chapel. People nodded politely as they passed, but their eyes slid past me to my daughter Isolde. She directed the service as if she were the widow. Every flower arrangement, every announcement, every whispered instruction to the ushers came from her lips. I tried to remind myself that grief makes people behave in strange ways. Still, when I overheard two of Rufus's colleagues mention that the passwords had already been changed, something inside me cracked. Passwords, just days after his death. That was my first sign that I was being erased, not only as Rufus's wife, but as the keeper of our shared life. I sat through the eulogies, bitterness pooling in my chest, realizing the farewell wasn't mine to shape. It had been taken from me. As the service ended, I moved into the hall with the others. Relatives clustered in small groups murmuring condolences, but few sought me out. They asked Isolde where the reception would be asked, her which attorney to call asked her questions that should have come to me. When she introduced herself to a distant cousin as the one managing Dad's estate, now my face burned. It was as if I no longer existed. I pressed my lips together, swallowing humiliation the way I had swallowed countless pills these last few weeks, just to sleep. My hands trembled not from grief alone, but from the sting of being sidelined in public by the very daughter I once carried in my arms. The hall buzzed with voices and the smell of coffee. I tried to step into one conversation, but people shifted their backs, closing me out like doors. I thought I had felt invisible before. That moment taught me a new depth of it. On the way outside, I paused when our neighbor Ophalie leaned close. She wore a polite smile, her pearls gleaming under the lights. "You must feel relieved," she said lightly. "Your daughter's so rich now you'll be fine." She meant it as comfort, but it landed like a dagger. Fine. Was that all they thought of me? That Isolde's money would replace my partnership with Rufus, my own identity, my right to stand as the matriarch of this family? My throat tightened. I forced a nod too choked to answer. The parking lot was already thinning when I stepped out into the warm Houston evening. I expected foolishly that Isolde would offer me a seat in her car. She didn't. She swept away in her luxury sedan, tinted windows rolling up as if to shut me out entirely. I stood with my purse pressed against my ribs, the pavement radiating heat through my shoes, wondering how a daughter could drive away from her own mother at such a moment. I lingered, staring after the disappearing taillights, and recalled Rufus's last warning before the hospital swallowed him. Keep the phrase safe. He had whispered, his eyes dull but intent. At the time, I thought he was talking about an online account or some insurance policy. Now, with everything stripped from me, I wondered if it was more. Something he feared our daughter would try to bury. That night, when I finally returned home, I sat in my quiet living room. The photographs on the mantel looked down at me, but even they seemed to belong to someone else's family now. The ache spread through me, sharper than grief alone. It wasn't just that Rufus was gone, it was that the life we built together was being stolen piece by piece, while the ground was still fresh over his grave. This was only the first cut. The deeper ones were waiting. The day after Rufus's funeral, I sat alone at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of my coffee cup when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Isolde and her husband, Dorian, standing with glossy brochures fanned in her manicured hand. They didn't ask to come in. They walked straight through the door, as if it already belonged to them. "We thought we'd save you some trouble," Isolde said with a brightness that cut sharper than any blade. She spread the brochures across the table retirement communities with smiling couples playing shuffleboard watercolor sunsets over manicured lawns. "Look at the amenities, Mother," she pressed, tapping a photo of a pool. "You'll have company meals security. Isn't that what you need now?" My throat tightened. They weren't offering options. They were presenting my exile. I stared at the paper pools and staged laughter, bitter realization flooding in. They wanted me gone from my own house. I forced a smile, but my hands clenched so tightly in my lap that my nails dug half moons into my skin. Dorian slid an envelope across the table as if sealing a business deal. $300, he said smoothly. "Just a little help to get you settled." I stared at it. Cash. Not an offer of support, not a plan to help me heal, just money to move me along like unwanted clutter. My pride screamed, but I swallowed it down with the metallic taste of humiliation. I knotted fingers, brushing the envelope without pulling it closer. It wasn't kindness. It was dismissal dressed in politeness. That weekend, they insisted I join them for dinner at a well-known restaurant. I hesitated, but loneliness can be a louder voice than dignity. I arrived heart-beating with some faint hope that maybe the sting of the brochures was a misunderstanding. The maitre d' looked confused when I gave my name. He checked his list and then gestured toward a small side table near the wall. At the long main table where family gathered under bright lights, my chair was missing. The space where I should have been seated was filled by a decorative plant. "Mrs. Marcella?" he asked again, guiding me to the side table. I sat there alone, watching relatives raise glasses across the room, their laughter ricocheting off the walls. I caught a few guests, whispering eyes flicking toward me, with pity, others pretending not to notice. My cheeks burned. Once I was the hostess, the center of every gathering. Now I was a shadow and afterthought at my own family's table. Between courses, I noticed Isolde's shoulders relax, her confidence swelling each time I was ignored. She thrived as I shrank, as if my silence fed her stature. And in that silence, a seed of suspicion took root. Why were they so eager to push me aside? What did they gain by moving me out? That night back home, I closed my bedroom door and turned the lock with a soft click. My hand lingered on Rufus's old keychain, the one he kept on his nightstand. I whispered into the darkness. Something doesn't add up. The brochures, the cash, the missing chair, they weren't just careless cuts. They were deliberate, measured, and deep inside I knew sharper wounds were waiting. The afternoon sun in Houston bled through the lace curtains of Isolde's house when I arrived. I had brought a plate of cookies, still warm, hoping to keep some thread between myself and my grandchildren. I wanted them to know their grandmother not through whispers, but through touch, taste, and presence. I found my granddaughter on the rug crayons, scattered like petals. She looked up, her face lit with innocence, and then she said words that froze me in place. "Mommy says Grandma doesn't need a big house anymore. She's useless now." Her little voice carried no malice, only repetition, but each syllable landed heavier than stones. My chest tightened. I felt as though betrayal had been etched into my own bloodline. The cruelty of my daughter's tongue had found new life in a child's mouth. I knelt beside her, brushing her hair back, swallowing the sob that rose. The cookies sat untouched on the table, their sweetness irrelevant against the bitterness gnawing inside me. I didn't correct her. I didn't let my grief spill onto her small shoulders. Instead, I folded the pain into silence. Children shouldn't carry the weight of poisoned words. But I recognized the pattern. Isolde was planting seeds, reshaping how the next generation would see me. To her, I wasn't mother or matriarch. I was a story to erase a burden to be edited out. My granddaughter turned back to her coloring, humming softly while I sat beside her, my heart burning with controlled sorrow. The next morning, I went to the bank to withdraw money for groceries and bills. The teller tapped at her keyboard, her expression polite but distant. Then she looked up. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Marcella, but this account has been closed, consolidated under your daughter's management." For a moment, the words didn't register. Closed. Consolidated. My signature, once required for every major decision, was now obsolete. I steadied my breath, pressing my hand against the counter so she wouldn't see it tremble. The teller slid a receipt across with neat letters. Access denied. I tucked the slip into my purse and walked out into the glaring Texas sun. The city moved around me, cars, rushing horns, blaring. But all I heard was Rufus's voice in memory. "Be cautious with your signature, Marcella. Some papers are more dangerous than they look." I clutched my purse tighter. This wasn't just negligence, it was design. Someone had paved the path to my financial disappearance. By the time I reached home, my shoes pinched and my body ached. I dropped into the chair by the window, staring at that receipt as if it were a death certificate. The house felt heavier, its silence pressing against me. I replayed every small act of exclusion, funeral whispers, brochures, the missing chair, and now this. They weren't accidents. They were steps. That night, I turned the lock on my bedroom door, shutting the world out. From the back of the closet, I pulled down Rufus's old leather folder, still sealed with the faint scent of tobacco and dust. I had avoided it, afraid it would cut deeper into grief. But now grief had given way to suspicion, and suspicion demanded answers. I laid the folder on my lap, the leather cracked beneath my fingers. "If they want me invisible," I whispered into the stillness, "I'll show them how wrong they are." The folder in my hands carried secrets heavier than grief. The midday light spilled across my kitchen table, the same table where Rufus and I once sorted bills and holiday menus. Now it held his leather folder, cracked and familiar, and my trembling hands. I was pulling papers into neat stacks when a knock rattled the front door. A courier stood outside holding an envelope stamped in red, time-sensitive signature required. My stomach tightened. I signed his pad, shut the door, and slid the envelope open with the dull edge of a butter knife. Inside lay a thick packet from a title company. The words homestead release and affidavit of heirship leapt out. They needed my signature, and there in black print was a closing date only weeks away. For a long minute I couldn't breathe. Someone was preparing to move property, our property, without me. My name was still needed, the law remembered me even if my daughter wanted me gone. I pressed the packet flat against the table, fury simmering low. It wasn't grief I felt now. It was suspicion sharpening into resolve. I pulled a yellow highlighter from the drawer and began combing through the clauses. Spousal rights, Texas homestead protections, line after line bound by laws Rufus used to discuss with steady certainty. The letter CC'd as old as email, but not mine, though it came addressed to me. A trail both deliberate and sloppy. She needed me invisible, but here I was, ink, standing between her and her prize. I snapped photos of every page with my phone, careful to capture dates and signatures. Then I slid the originals back into Rufus's folder. My hand hovered over the signature line only once before I closed the cover. Not today. Not ever without understanding. The packet joined the bank receipt stamped "Access Denied" and my marriage certificate, each paper now a tile in a mosaic of betrayal. Evening crept in shadows, stretching long across the floor. My phone rang an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Marcella. "This is Thomas, worked with Rufus in title services years ago." His voice carried the weight of retirement, calm but urgent. He had seen my address flagged in a cross-check. "I thought you should know. In recent preliminary filings, your name. It's not there where it always used to be. It looks like an update removed you. Be careful. Don't sign anything under pressure. If you need to check, the county clerk's office keeps public records online." I pressed the phone to my ear, throat dry. Someone out there had noticed. Someone saw me. Gratitude mingled with alarm. "Thank you, Thomas." I whispered, my voice steadier than I felt. When we hung up, I sat in the dim kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator loud as thunder. Twist S8 had landed proof that erasure wasn't paranoia. It was in motion. That night, I spread everything across the table again. The title packet, the denial slip from the bank, our marriage certificate. Under the kitchen light, it looked like evidence in a trial yet to come. I wrote a plan on a scrap of paper. Call title company. Ask questions. Document answers. If wrong, call attorney. Rufus's old keychain and a faded note rested on top. His handwriting familiar as his laugh, never sign without understanding. I tucked the folder into my bedroom drawer and locked it. On my phone, I texted myself a checklist: 1. Call title. 2. Save call log. 3. Request closing file. 4. Ask about change of contact. The screen glowed in the dark as I rehearsed what I would say: calm, factual, unshakable. Lying back, I whispered into the ceiling to Rufus, to myself. They wanted me invisible. The law didn't forget me. Before I could call the title company, my daughter chose the internet to tell a different story about what was hers. Morning light slid across my kitchen tile as I poured coffee and set Rufus's old folder within reach. My phone lay beside the mug. I had rehearsed the questions I would ask. Then a notification pulsed across the glass. Isolde had gone live. I tapped before I could talk myself out of it. Her face filled the screen, flawless makeup. She thanked viewers for their prayers, then smiled in a way that meant a knife was coming. "I've secured my father's $55 million estate," she said, voice sweet. "Mom will be comfortable in a lovely retirement center soon. She never cared for investments. I'll preserve Dad's legacy the right way." The chat exploded with congratulations. My hand found the pen I'd meant to use for questions and snapped it in two. Coffee went cold while my daughter declared my erasure to strangers who called her brave. She even named a facility off I-10 like it was a spa, not a place where lives grow small. She tilted her head, confiding, "Mom gets overwhelmed by paperwork." I ended the stream and stared at my reflection in the black screen, a widow turned prop. In the afternoon, I drove to the neighborhood grocery, the kind where checkers know your peaches by month. I wanted lettuce dish soap, a reason to stand upright. In produce, 2 young women angled their carts together and looked straight through me. Isn't that her one whispered, not whispering at all? The mother from the live stream. Poor thing lost everything. A man in a ball cap examined tomatoes and muttered, "Daughter knows best. At least someone's in charge." I picked a head of romaine with hands that did not shake, then reached for parsley I did not need, as if herbs could cover the smell of public pity. At the dairy case, I saw myself in the glass hair, pulled back mouth set, the woman people talk over. I walked slower, feeling sets of eyes that might have been curiosity or might have been nothing at all. Humiliation has a sound it hums behind your ears, like a fluorescent light you cannot turn off. I paid attention to prices I'd memorized as if totals could anchor me to myself. At the register, an elderly woman ahead of me turned her eyes the blue of linen left in sun. She took in my cart, then my face, and spoke without pity. "Honey," she said quietly, "don't let them tell your story. Tell your own." I felt the sting in my throat ease by a fraction. "I don't know where to begin," I admitted, surprised at my own voice. "Begin with one truth," she said, bagging her milk herself. "Then stack the others on it." She touched my forearm, no theatrics, just a human hand, and moved on. Outside, the heat met me like a wall. I loaded groceries with deliberate care, eggs on top, bread uncrushed. In the parked car, I let the air run forehead on the wheel. The live stream's phrases circling, secured the estate retirement center, preserved the legacy. My daughter's performance had worked. An audience had applauded. But applause fades. Paper doesn't. I slid the receipt into Rufus's folder on the passenger seat and promised myself the next time I spoke, it would be with proof. That evening, my phone lit up until the kitchen was a field of tiny lightning. In the family group chat, Isolde posted the video link with champagne emojis. Cousins chimed in from out of state. An aunt sent hearts and wrote, "Your father would be proud." No one asked me anything, though my name sat on the screen like an empty chair. Then direct messages bled in. "Auntie, are you okay?" A nephew typed. "Did you give her the house?" Another relative added a prayer sticker, a version of averted eyes. I thought of the dinners I used to host place cards by my hand. I timed pot roast and cornbread to arrive together so everyone felt seen. Now my daughter had organized a different table, one where I served as a cautionary tale. A cousin I hadn't heard from in years congratulated Isolde for being so strong with finances and attached a funeral photo where I stood blurred behind floral sprays. Someone else typed, "She'll be happier with people her age," a sentence shaped like kindness and sharp as glass. Isolde pinned a comment that the move was for my safety and that she had taken the burden so I could enjoy what's left. I set the phone down before it taught me new ways to bleed. I did not argue in the thread. I brewed tea I didn't drink and opened Rufus's folder instead. Inside the title packet lay where I'd placed it, "Patient as a teacher." I wrote a list on a yellow pad firm lettering that would not tremble, call the title company at 9, request the full closing file, ask who altered contact permissions, save the call log, take names. If arrogance needs an audience, truth prefers a timestamp. I drafted a note to myself to check county records online, then emailed the old colleague who'd warned me thanking him. On another page, I practiced sentences that did not accuse, but required answers, not a retirement center brochure among them. I placed the phone face down, turned the folder so the brass corners shone and spoke to the quiet house. "Let them clap for you now, Isolde," I said, voice low and even. "Tomorrow they'll watch you fall, and I won't have to raise my voice to push." The air seemed to settle around the promise. I slid the list under the folder's strap, clicked off the kitchen light, and let the dark hold my plan without gossip or applause now. I set my alarm for 9 and put fresh paper by the phone, reminding myself to remember who I am. Morning sunlight slipped across my kitchen table, illuminating Rufus's leather folder, still half opened from the night before. My coffee sat cooling beside it untouched. I dialed the title company number from the envelope, my fingers steady, though my heart raced. A woman's voice answered, polite but hesitant. When I asked about the documents, she lowered her tone, almost whispering, "Ma'am, your daughter asked us to remove you from the contact list, but we cannot finalize the transfer without your signature." Her words burned through me like acid. For a moment, silence filled the line. My daughter had tried to erase me not just from her life, but from the records, the law itself. I pressed the record button on my phone, letting the conversation save in the background. I thanked her calmly, my voice, even though inside I trembled. She didn't realize she'd given me my first weapon. I hung up and sat in that quiet kitchen staring at the folder. This wasn't grief anymore. It was war conducted behind polished doors. By late morning, I was at the office of Harrison McLean Rufus's longtime attorney. Harrison had been at our wedding. His signature was on the papers that built our home. He was older now, gray at the temples, but his handshake was as firm as ever. I came as soon as I could, I told him, sliding the packet and my receipts across the desk. He read in silence, then stood cross to a locked cabinet and returned with a sealed envelope marked with Rufus's handwriting. My breath caught. "This is your husband's last will," Marcella Harrison said gently. "He left instructions for me to open it only when necessary. I believe now is that time." The seal cracked, and he unfolded the document. My eyes scanned the words that shifted my world again, 70% of Rufus's estate to me, 30% to Isolde. Clear, precise, undeniable. Harrison met my gaze. "Your daughter's narrative that everything belongs to her is false. Legally, you hold the majority, but don't confront her yet. Let her arrogance build. Evidence speaks louder when the world already doubts her." For the first time since Rufus's death, my chest loosened. relief mixed with resolve. She thought she had buried me, but my husband had ensured I was still standing. That afternoon, Harrison drove with me to the bank. A clerk escorted us to a quiet room and brought out a safe deposit box under both Rufus's and my names. My hands shook slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside were old deeds account ledgers, and at the very bottom a folded letter in Rufus's familiar handwriting. The paper smelled faintly of his study ink cedar and thyme. I unfolded it slowly. If they try to erase you, remember the law never forgot you. Guard the phrase, only you and I know. Tears blurred the ink, but I smiled through them. Rufus had left me more than paper. He left me a lifeline. This was my anchor proof that he had prepared for betrayal even I hadn't imagined. Driving home through Houston's busy streets, I replayed the smug tilt of Isolde's head in her live stream, her polished smile declaring me irrelevant. Yet with Rufus's letter in my purse, her words no longer stung the same. The city lights blurred in my windshield, but for once they didn't look hostile. They looked like signals guiding me forward. At a stoplight, I pressed my hand against the purse where Rufus's letter rested. It felt almost warm, like he was still here, still telling me, "Stand tall. Marcella, you're not done." That night, I sat at the kitchen table with only the hum of the refrigerator for company. I spread out my growing arsenal, the title company envelope, the recorded call, the sealed will, and Rufus's letter. One by one, I placed them in order like stepping stones. "They think they've buried me," I whispered into the dim light. "But they don't know I've been handed the shovel." I drafted a timeline in my notebook, wait, collect, document, expose. The plan wasn't to fight in anger, but to fight in truth at the right moment. The house creaked around me, settling for the night. I slid Rufus's letter back into my purse and locked the rest in the drawer. The quiet felt different now. No longer the silence of defeat, but of preparation. Tomorrow would bring more cruelty, I was sure. But tomorrow I'd be ready to hold on until the cracks in her facade spread wide enough for everyone to see. Saturday afternoon found me sitting by the window with a cup of tea when the first call came. A cousin, breathless with excitement, told me what she had just witnessed at the Galleria Mall. My daughter Isolde, surrounded by her fashionable friends, had been strutting through the boutiques with her usual air of superiority. Arms loaded with expensive dresses and handbags, she had marched to the checkout counter with the poise of someone untouchable. Then it happened. Her credit card was declined. Once, twice. The clerk, embarrassed, tried again, but the machine beeped the same message. My cousin said the silence in that bright, bustling store felt louder than church bells. Friends exchanged awkward looks, some whispered, others simply stared, and Isolde. Her face turned crimson as she barked that it must be a bank error, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I sat quietly listening, imagining her veneer of perfection cracking in front of strangers. The whispers spread quickly. By evening, 2 more relatives had called me repeating the same story with added details. Isolde had stormed out, leaving her shopping bags behind, muttering about incompetent staff. One even said she slammed her phone against the counter, demanding the bank fix their mistake. I said little in return, only murmured that I hoped she was all right. Inside, though, I felt the strange warmth of bitter satisfaction. Not because I wished her harm, but because I finally saw arrogance answering to reality. It was as if the universe had whispered, "Your silence has not been in vain." Later that evening, another wave of news reached me. Isolde had organized a grand dinner party at one of Houston's downtown restaurants, a lavish celebration she called a toast to new beginnings. She had invited colleagues, friends, even extended family, all eager to bask in her supposed wealth and newfound power. Social media was flooded with pictures of her in a glittering dress, holding a glass of champagne, grinning as though nothing had touched her. But then came the moment no dress or smile could save. A waiter slipped her a discreet note at the table. Her payment hadn't cleared. Guests fell silent, the laughter choking in their throats. My cousin, who had attended, described the scene in detail. Isolde froze, forced a smile, and tried to laugh it off. But her hand trembled, and the room knew. The embarrassment was not hers alone. It was shared by everyone who had clung to her illusion of grandeur. I wasn't there, of course. I sat at home watching it unravel through photographs and shaky videos sent by relatives. Her forced grin, her faltering words, the unease spreading across the table. It was all there preserved by the very audience she'd worked so hard to impress. I watched it over and over, not with cruelty, but with a steady calm. For years, she had tried to paint me as invisible, irrelevant, unworthy. Now the paint was peeling and the truth was showing through. That night I opened my journal and wrote, "I don't need to raise my voice. The truth is loud enough when it chooses its moment." Every cruel word she had spoken about me, every humiliation she had orchestrated was circling back. The cracks in her perfect facade were visible now, and they would only widen. I closed the journal and whispered into the quiet kitchen, "The time will come, and I will be ready." The morning air in Houston was heavy, the kind that pressed down on you before the sun had even fully risen. I had stopped by the bank downtown, clutching a copy of Rufus's will in my purse. My errands done, I drove past Isolde's neighborhood on my way home. I hadn't planned it, it was just on the route, but fate has a way of arranging what we need to see. I slowed as I neared her gated home. A white sheriff's cruiser was parked at the curb, its blue emblem glinting in the sunlight. My stomach tightened. Then I saw him, a uniformed sheriff, tall, steady, with a thick folder in his hand, walking toward the iron gate. He knocked firmly 3 times. A pause. Then again. The sound echoed down the street, clear and final. When the gate creaked open, there stood Isolde in her silk robe, her hair tied back like she had been caught off guard. The sheriff handed her the papers and spoke words I couldn't hear. But I saw the change in her posture, the way her shoulders slumped, the way her jaw stiffened. She glanced around as if checking who might be watching. And she was right. I was watching from across the street. Neighbors peeked from behind blinds. One woman even lingered by her mailbox, pretending to check for letters. The sight of my proud daughter frozen in her own driveway, receiving an order that stripped away her control, it was a moment I would never forget. The sheriff's car pulled away, leaving silence in its wake. She clutched the papers like they were burning her hands. I drove on my heart, pounding the image etched into me like scripture. The law had spoken. By noon, my phone buzzed nonstop. Cousins, nieces, even church friends, all with the same question. Is it true the sheriff froze everything? Screenshots of text threads flew into my inbox. Family circles that had cheered her live stream were now whispering a different tune. I didn't answer. Not one word. I let the silence do its work. In gossip, silence is louder than denial. They could speculate all they wanted. The truth was already out. Her proud declaration of being the sole heir now looked like nothing more than a performance collapsing under its own weight. I placed the phone face down and poured myself tea. Vindication tasted quiet, not loud. That afternoon, as I left the title company with more copies of the will, I felt footsteps behind me in the parking lot. I turned, and there was Dorian. His tie loosened his face tight with fury. "You're ruining everything," he hissed, stepping closer than decency allowed. "Do you think Isolde will ever forgive you for this, for humiliating her in front of everyone?" His words sprayed heat, but I stood still, my purse at my side. What he didn't know was that my phone tucked inside was already recording. "Mr. Doyle," I said evenly, "you'll want to step back. Threats don't erase court orders." His eyes flashed. "You'll regret this." He spun on his heel and stalked off, leaving the scent of his cologne trailing behind like smoke. I exhaled slowly, every nerve alive. Desperation had stripped away their polish, and I had proof. Later I met Harrison again in his office, the walls lined with law books that smelled faintly of dust and ink. He read through the sheriff's order, carefully nodding. "This protects your rights until trial," he assured me. "They cannot sell or transfer a penny, but expect backlash. They'll push harder now, especially emotionally. You need to be prepared." I nodded, folding the copy neatly into my folder. Relief washed over me, but it wasn't the sweet kind. It was the kind you sip carefully, knowing it could be taken away at any moment. "Then I'll be ready," I said. That night, my house was quiet, but my thoughts were alive. I spread Rufus's letter, the bank slips, and the court order across the table like pieces of a puzzle nearly complete. I touched the safe deposit box key still attached to his old keychain. "They thought money erased me," I whispered, "but the law still sees me, and so will everyone else." I locked everything away again and sat in the dark, hands steady. A storm was building, not one of rage, but of resolve. The battle wasn't over, but I was no longer walking into it empty-handed. The Sunday sun blazed hot over West Houston, though the smell of smoked brisket and sweet corn softened the air around my cousin's backyard. A barbecue was supposed to mean laughter, yet tension clung tighter than the humidity. Folding chairs lined the yard, and chatter buzzed louder than the cicadas. I settled quietly in a corner seat, where I could see, but not be seen too much. It didn't take long. Whispers traveled faster than smoke, and soon voices sharpened. My cousins, emboldened by gossip, pressed Isolde for answers about the sheriff's visit. "Is it true everything's frozen?" one uncle asked between bites. "Just procedural," Isolde said with a practiced smile, her tone dripping assurance. "The lawyers are clearing up some technicalities. My mother is confused. She's obstructing what Dad wanted." All eyes shifted toward me. I didn't flinch. I kept my hands folded in my lap, breathing slow. The urge to defend myself burned hot, but I knew silence could be sharper than words. So I let the questions pile up at her feet. She smiled tighter, her voice thinning as the scrutiny mounted. Later in the narrow kitchen corridor, the air heavy with the scent of grilled onions, Isolde found me alone. Her lipstick smile stayed frozen, but her whisper cut deep. "Mom, for the family's sake, just sign the homestead release," she murmured. "If you don't, you'll lose everything. You'll have nothing." I looked her straight in the eye. Calm, steady. "I don't sign what I haven't read." A flicker crossed her face. Anger, then fear. She glanced over her shoulder as footsteps neared, then retreated into the laughter of the crowd, leaving her words hanging like smoke. Back home, I laid my phone on the kitchen table and began my quiet work. I exported screenshots of the family group chat, the one where she had flaunted her live stream and claimed ownership of Rufus's estate. I saved voicemails from cousins describing her red-faced outburst at the mall and the embarrassment at her party. Each file I labeled with date, time, and sender. This was no longer gossip. It was evidence. Twist S17 was taking shape, an organized file, unemotional and precise. I named it estate_truth. PDF, and kept going. Next, I pulled clips from my Ring doorbell camera. Clear as daylight, Dorian standing at my porch weeks earlier, sliding brochures of retirement homes and an envelope of cash across my table. The timestamps glowed in the corner of each frame. I scanned the title company packet that had arrived by courier, careful to highlight the line requiring my signature. I added the bank receipt from when I was denied access to our joint account. Finally, I logged the sheriff's order, stapling it alongside Rufus's marriage certificate. A pattern was forming undeniable. Who said what, when, and where, all cross-checked, all airtight. By nightfall, I had assembled it all into a PDF binder. With a steady hand, I emailed it to Harrison. His reply came swift, "Excellent. Tomorrow we escalate." I set an appointment with a senior bank officer, Claudine, requesting full records of contact changes and attempted transfers. My calendar dinged Monday at 10 a.m. On my desk, I placed Rufus's letter beside my phone. His words steadied me. "The law never forgot you," I whispered into the quiet. They thought intimidation would break me, but silence has its own power. The storm was far from over, but tonight my footing felt firm. Monday morning, the glass walls of the bank's senior office reflected sunlight across polished wood. I sat opposite Claudine, a woman with steady eyes and silver strands in her dark hair, who carried a folder too thick to be routine. She slid it across the desk, her voice lowered to a near whisper. "Mrs. Vaughn," she said, "I think you need to see this." My breath caught before I even opened it. The folder held internal records, transaction attempts flagged entries, irregularities that smelled of desperation. On the first page, my name appeared crossed out in a joint account note. Below it, a shaky scrawl imitating my signature. I leaned closer, jaw tight. "That's not mine." Claudine nodded gravely. "It isn't. The handwriting doesn't match your verified file, and the timestamps line up with the very day your daughter made her live stream announcement. Whoever submitted this, they tried to erase you." I steadied my hands on the desk. Anger flared, but beneath it was a cold certainty. They hadn't just humiliated me in public, they were willing to commit crimes to bury me. Page after page revealed the same attempt-forged forms, contact change requests, requests to redirect communications away from me and toward Isolde. Claudine tapped one with a manicured finger. This alone, she said, could be pursued criminally. Forgery, intent to defraud. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear. It was recognition. They had stooped lower than I ever imagined, and the evidence was in my hands now. Would it hold? I asked, my voice steady, though my pulse raced. "Yes," she said firmly. "The bank's compliance team keeps redundant verification records. These copies prove someone attempted to remove you illegally. If you press forward, this won't just be civil, it could be criminal liability." The weight of those words filled the room. For once, I felt the scales tilt, even if only slightly in my favor. Then Claudine opened a second slimmer folder marked "Restricted." "There's something else," she said, sliding it toward me. Inside was a single account record, my name alone listed as owner. Balance substantial. A note scanned into the file in Rufus's familiar handwriting, for Marcella, to ensure her independence. I touched the page as though it might dissolve. My eyes burned with tears I hadn't invited. For all his flaws, for all his silence near the end, Rufus had thought ahead. He had carved out space for me that no daughter's arrogance could steal. "They never found this?" I asked. "No," Claudine said softly. "It's confidential. Only you were listed." He made sure. Relief swept through me, not just for the money, but for the proof that I was not erased, that somewhere in the paper trails my husband had left me a lifeline. I closed the folders, exhaling slowly. "Claudine, thank you. Please keep this discreet." Her brows lifted slightly. "You don't want to act now?" "Not yet," I replied. "They must reveal themselves fully before I strike. If I act too soon, they'll claim misunderstanding. I need them tangled in their own arrogance." She studied me a long moment, then nodded. "When you're ready, we'll back you. Legally and fully." I rose, gathering the evidence into my bag. My grip was firm, not trembling. For the first time in weeks, I felt a thread of control weaving back into my hands. That evening, I lit a candle by Rufus's photo on the mantel. Shadows played across his face in the frame, a reminder of his quiet warnings. "You planned for me," I whispered, "and I'll finish this." On the kitchen table, I sorted the day's revelations into my growing binder, forged documents, timelines, voicemails, now this confidential account. Each piece fit tighter than the last. The storm wasn't over, if anything. It was gathering force, but I was no longer drifting inside it. I had a compass. I had proof. And I had patience enough to let their empire of lies collapse under its own weight. I closed the binder, the candle flickering beside me. "They thought they buried me," I murmured. "But the law never forgot me, and soon neither will anyone else." Tuesday morning light spilled across the kitchen table as I turned the small brass key over in my hand. Rufus had pressed it into my palm years ago, whispering a phrase only the two of us shared. At the time, I thought it was sentimental, a private ritual between husband and wife. Now, with everything crumbling around me, it felt like a compass. I carried the key into the title company's conference room. The supervisor, a woman in a tailored gray jacket, studied it and then typed my social security number into her system. Her brows arched. There is another record linked to this key. It points to a safe deposit box downtown. Hope stirred in me, fragile, almost frightening. I signed the authorization papers with a steady hand, though my pulse raced. For once, Isolde's name was nowhere on the page. This was mine. By late morning, I was standing in the cold belly of a Houston bank vault, Harrison by my side. The steel drawer slid open with a groan, and inside lay a neat bundle of folders tied with ribbon, an envelope sealed in wax, and receipts spanning decades. My breath caught. Harrison lifted the letter carefully and handed it to me. Rufus's handwriting sprawled across the front. For Marcella, when the world turns unkind. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Marcella, it began. I knew charm could turn to greed, even in our own blood. I left provisions that cannot be erased. These documents name you as sole owner of certain properties and accounts. Do not doubt yourself. The law recognizes what love built, even if family forgets. And remember our phrase, it will open doors if others try to shut them. Do not sign away your voice. I pressed the paper to my chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt him beside me, steady and unwavering. Tears blurred the ink, but beneath the grief was fire. Harrison spread the deeds across the banker's desk, 2 properties fully in my name. Insurance riders guaranteeing payouts solely to me, and updated investment accounts untouched by Isolde's meddling. He looked at me over his glasses. This isn't just protection, Marcella. It's a counterstrike. These papers will speak louder than any live stream. The weight in my chest shifted from fear to focus. I nodded. Then we prepare for the arbitration. Let her drown in her own arrogance. I'll bring the tide. That evening back at home, I lit Rufus's candle once more. The glow flickered against his photograph, the flame steady despite the draft. I whispered, "You gave me the key, not just to a box, but back to myself. They wanted me, invisible Rufus, but you made sure I could never be erased." I laid the documents on the table, stacked neatly ready for the next battle. Outside, Houston traffic hummed its endless chorus. But in my home, silence carried the promise of justice. By midweek, the family would gather in my living room, papers spread across the coffee table. For the first time, I would hold the floor. By 6 o'clock that Wednesday evening, my living room was crowded. Cousins filled the chairs, some balancing plates of food on their knees, others whispering nervously. The tension was thick enough to taste. I sat near the coffee table, Rufus's documents neatly stacked in front of me. The air shifted when Isolde and Dorian finally swept in late. As always, their polished confidence dulled by the past week's storms. A few cousins leaned closer to each other, whispering. I stayed still, watching, letting the silence sharpen the moment. The questions came quickly. What's happening with the estate? Why did the sheriff show up? Why are there rumors about forged papers? Eyes darted between me and my daughter, demanding answers neither of us could avoid. I folded my hands, waiting. This was the storm I had carried toward, and it was here. When the voices reached a fever pitch, I slid Rufus's letter onto the table, followed by the bank memo from Claudine. The room quieted instantly. My voice was steady, calm as I spoke. My husband anticipated this. He left documents that protected my rights. Attempts were made to erase me, but they failed. The law and Rufus's foresight kept me where I belong. Gasps filled the room as papers passed from hand to hand. Cousins bent over paragraphs, tracing signatures and seals. The words forged attempt and sole ownership hissed through the air like sparks. I saw confusion harden into outrage on their faces. Murmurs rose, pointed glances turned toward Isolde. My daughter's painted smile faltered. The confrontation broke like thunder. A cousin slammed the papers down. You had $55 million, Isolde, and you still pushed your mother out. How could you? Isolde's voice cracked, as she tried to explain. I was preserving Dad's legacy. She doesn't understand investments, she never did, but the chorus drowned her out. That's not preservation, that's theft. You humiliated your own mother in public. What kind of daughter does that? Dorian shifted uncomfortably, his shoulders sinking lower with every accusation. For the first time, I saw the fight leave him. Isolde's defenses crumbled under the weight of her own family's scorn. I didn't have to argue anymore. The room did it for me. My silence had turned into the loudest weapon. I rose slowly, my hands resting on the edge of the table. The room hushed. I looked from face to face, then to my daughter, who stared down at the carpet. "I don't need revenge," I said softly but firmly. "The truth is enough." The words landed heavy in the quiet. Some nodded, others looked away in shame. The power I had lost weeks earlier was back, not because I shouted, but because I chose not to. I gathered Rufus's documents and pressed them against my chest. That night, when the house was empty again, I climbed the stairs to my bedroom. I placed Rufus's brass key and his letter in the top drawer of my dresser, then lit the small candle by his photo. The flame swayed gently, reflecting in the glass. I carried the storm, I whispered, and I put it down. Peace washed over me, not from apologies that would never come, but from reclaiming myself. The truth was laid bare, the power rebalanced. My daughter might never kneel to remorse, but I no longer needed her to. The wound would remain, but so would I. And I would not be erased. Looking back on my journey, I've learned that silence is not weakness. It is often the greatest strength. Standing firm for your dignity, even when those closest to you betray you, is the hardest but most necessary step toward peace. Life teaches us that money can buy attention, but it cannot buy respect or love. What truly matters is protecting your voice, your worth, and your place in the family story. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to defend your dignity, even against those you love? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, type 1 below or tell me where you're watching from. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to this channel so you won't miss the next one.